This video is going to focus on the Coffee Lake CPUs by Intel and the Ryzen CPUs manufactured by AMD. Prior to the release of the Ryzen CPU, I had made some videos about that particular processor, and I thought it showed a lot of hope and promise that we were going to get 8-core CPUs at a relatively inexpensive price. That proved to be true. Once the Ryzen CPU was released, I did make a video. I did state the CPUs seemed like they were pretty impressive, but the motherboards did not. The motherboard still had PCI Express 2.0 compliant expansion slots. They had some that were PCI Express 3.0 as well, but I thought it was sad news in the year 2017 to see motherboards with PCI Express 2.0 compliant hardware on them. Another thing I had mentioned when the Ryzen CPUs launched, I mentioned the motherboards didn't support Intel's Optane memory modules. Now, what was really cool about the Intel Optane memory modules is that you could use any mechanical hard drive and kind of use this Optane memory as, I guess you could say, like a cache for it to almost make it like almost you were building your own hybrid. How they have mechanical hard drives that'll have like solid state hardware connected to them. Some of them are 16 gigabytes, some of them are 32 gigabytes. But with the Optane memory module, I think a lot of people thought you could get 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 mechanical hard drives, stripe them together in a RAID array, and then you could use this Optane memory as a cache. Some people thought you could maybe use external RAID arrays and connect it to this Optane memory module and use it as cache, for an actual external RAID array system. Intel doesn't allow you to do that at this point in time. That's kind of the big downer for it. The technology is good and it works. It can really give, the old, well, I wouldn't say old, but the mechanical hard drives, it can really give them a boost in performance, as everybody can tell from benchmarks. But like I said, Intel didn't implement it the way a lot of people thought that it should be implemented. A lot of people think you should be able to choose how you want to implement that Optane memory module. You should be able to pick your hard drive system. And if that were the case, yeah, it would allow people to actually edit like 4K uncompressed, 6K uncompressed. Not that people work with 6K uncompressed video. Usually people are using like the Red 1 codec, or they're using maybe Apple ProRes that has some kind of compression to it. But that's what I was really looking forward to, is that you wouldn't need like 10 hard drives striped together. You could stripe together 3 or 4, and then you'd be able to go out and buy like a 64 gigabyte, Optane memory module, maybe even 128 gigabyte memory module in another year or two from now. So that's what I was really looking forward to. I think maybe with Cannon Lake or Ice Lake, we will see more flexibility, with the Optane memory technology. One other thing I want to mention about the Ryzen motherboards when they were first released is that none of them supported Thunderbolt 3. Thunderbolt 3 has been out for over 2 years now, and I have to admit, Intel doesn't have that many motherboards that have Thunderbolt 3. They might, like 1 out of every 30 supports Thunderbolt 3. Maybe like 1 out of every 20 laptops has Thunderbolt 3 support. It's out there, but I really think Intel should, at this point in time, in the year 2017, at least 50% of the motherboards should support Thunderbolt 3. I am now going to start talking about the actual Intel Coffee Lake CPU as well as the AMD Ryzen CPU. As you can tell, where you see decode and encode, you've got H.264, JPEG, H.265, as well as other codecs in there as well. As you can tell, the Ryzen CPU has no listed by those, where the Intel has them listed as though it does have those extra features. When we talk about Intel's QuickSync, which Final Cut Pro 10 can use, so on a relatively inexpensive laptop without GPU acceleration, if you're editing H.264, H.265, or AVCHD codec, that Intel QuickSync really will give a boost to certain programs like Final Cut Pro 10, and the Edia software can take advantage of QuickSync as well. That's something you wouldn't get with the Ryzen CPU. Premiere Pro doesn't really take advantage of the encoding and decoding of the Intel QuickSync technology. I wish they would. I don't know why they haven't implemented. I know when it first got introduced, well, probably like 5, 6 years ago, it wasn't as good as it is now. Every year, the Intel QuickSync technology gets better and better. If you notice, they got the JPEG codec in there. Some of you might know when they compare the AMD Ryzen 1700 and even the 1800 against the Intel 8700K, it can actually manipulate photos in Photoshop and also in Lightroom better than the Ryzen CPUs. And I think it's because it does have some of that extra hardware technology built into it that you're probably not going to get with the AMD CPU. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the benchmarks of the 8700K versus AMD, the Ryzen, the 1700 CPU. And in a lot of benchmarks, the Intel CPU can actually outperform the AMD Ryzen 1700 CPU. Now, one's going to argue that, hey, Intel's got a better architecture because they've only got 6 cores and it's outperforming Ryzen CPU with 8 cores. Other people are going to say, look at the gigahertz that they're running at. The Intel CPUs are running at a lot higher gigahertz, so it compensates for it only having 6 cores. It's kind of a different approach the way they did it. You could actually have a 4-cylinder that's got a turbocharge on it, high compression ratio, and that engine's probably going to wear out a little bit quicker than like a 6-cylinder, diesel engine. So one might have quite a lot of performance for its size, but some people might worry about the high clock speed. Some people have mentioned the 87 runs a little bit hot. Other people say it doesn't. I'm not going to say that it runs hot or that it doesn't run hot. I'm just saying it's a little bit different way to think about it. When we think about engines like a 4-cylinder or an 8-cylinder, if somebody has an 8-cylinder that's only, let's say, 2 liters, which is a small 8-cylinder, 2 liter, and somebody has a 4-cylinder that's a 2 liter, they're basically about the same size. But what if the 8-cylinder somehow got better gas mileage than the 4-cylinder? There would be some benefits with the 8-cylinder. Maybe it would run smoother. Maybe somehow it would get better gas mileage. I'm not saying it would. I'm just letting people know there's different ways to evaluate the CPU architecture. I don't think anybody's ever done a video like that. The only thing I want to say as I close out this video is that some people might have noticed when they've actually overclocked some of the AMD Ryzen CPUs, they've actually performed worse. And that's the only thing that scares me. It's kind of like if you've got an engine and you put a turbocharger on it, it should actually get better performance, not worse performance. One could argue that the Intel architecture is slightly better than AMD because we haven't seen any of the Intel CPUs that are overclocked take a hit in performance. But there's things to look at. You got to look at how much wattage does it use. Does the Intel run a little bit hotter than the AMD? You got to look at the price point. I mean, one might have a little bit better performance, but if it's twice as expensive as the competition, it might not be the best bang for the buck. So there's obviously ways you have to go about evaluating what CPU is right for you. As far as the benchmarks are concerned and the problem with the overclocked AMDs, you got to figure there's like 100 benchmarks they did, and maybe like a half a dozen took a performance hit. So it's something that probably wouldn't affect a lot of you. And if you don't overclock, then you really wouldn't even have to worry about it in the first place. So that's pretty much the end of this video. For me personally, I'm going to probably build a new computer in 2018. And I think I'm probably going to make my choice based on the motherboard as opposed to the CPU itself. And I made mention in the video I did, probably almost a year ago to date, that's probably what it would come down to for my own personal decision. I think AMD and Intel both have really good CPUs. In 2018, we'll probably see the prices drop and we'll see the competition get even more fierce than what it did in 2017. So that's the end of the video. I hope it might have put a little bit of different light on the Coffee Lake versus Ryzen CPU videos that you've seen so far.